You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Hello again, everyone. This is Doug Thorpe, and you are listening to a new episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I'm really excited about our topic today. It's one that is out in the modern work world. It's confused by many, misunderstood by a lot, and seldom practiced well, and that is the notion of empathetic leadership. And please don't punch the dial. Please don't tune out. You're going to be inspired here, I think, if you'll hang with us a little bit. My guest is someone who specializes in that area. Her name is Erin Thorp. No relation. One of us has an E on the end of our name. The other does not. And we'll tease that out later. But Erin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Doug. It's great to be here. And yes, I don't know about you. I get E's added to the end of my name all the time.
Well, I get my name just simply butchered in pronunciation most of the time. So you learn to live with it. And I'm sure somewhere back in the 15th century, you and I probably shared some relatives somewhere over in Northern Europe, but Scandinavia and such. But anyway, all that aside, welcome to the show and glad to have you here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So I talked about the idea of empathetic leadership, and I do firmly believe, just to mention the word, it turns some people off. Some people that are in senior leadership roles, they look at you and say, "You want me to be empathetic? I got a job to do. I got work to do," and there's a disconnect there, but as biased as that statement may sound, let me let you describe kind of well, first, maybe how did you get into the realm of helping people with the notion of being a more empathetic leader?
Yeah, great question. So I grew up on a farm in northern Alberta. I went to school to be an engineer and then quickly found myself in a construction role. So the only female on a lot of construction sites for a lot of years. And for many, many years was told that I had this, quote unquote, too emotional side that was going to hold me back and that I needed to learn how to fix it. And so for 10 to 15 years, that's what I tried to do, right? I bashed up against it. I tried to get rid of it. I did everything I could possibly do to disconnect myself from this emotional side of me that, looking back, one might call it a more intuitive side, a more, kind of tuned in side. But I was in an industry and surrounded by people that didn't see it as a strength. And it wasn't until I started to get into my own leadership roles that I was like, I guess I kind of, you might call it like dip a toe in, or tried to kind of test out the waters with like, okay, I'm feeling this thing and I think I should take this action. How does the team respond to it? And in many cases, it was very positive. And then I had my own experiences with leaders, ones where I really felt like they took the time to understand where I was at, what I was going through, and ones where they totally missed everything. And so I started to pay attention, and I just started to kind of go like, what makes me feel motivated and engaged and inspired to contribute to this team as a team member? And then what do I see happening in my team when I lead in this way versus that way? So for the last 10 years or so, I would say it's been a big experiment of leading teams, both corporately and entrepreneurially, and a home team, raising 3 teenagers. So, got all the teams going on. And, so some of this is my own experience. Some of this has been validated through research. But for me, it's really it's been this curiosity that I think I've dug into. And I would say my own lived experience has just shown me that it is a very powerful way to lead, and that we can get things done and be empathic at the same time. And that's,
I like that.
That's kind of where I'm at. Yeah.
There's a whole lot that has been written and published and espoused about this element of leadership becoming a little more empathetic. One practical matter that I try to confront or present to my clients when they're pushing back on this idea of maybe opening up a little bit and being a little more empathetic. I often introduce the reminder about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that the psychology that says we as human beings exist on various levels, and some of the most base level, you can think caveman day, is the tiger going to eat me, or am I going to eat it? And the whole food safety and shelter is the baseline. Then you get up into a level of community, and then above that you get into kind of the notion of feeling loved and appreciated, and then above that, so on and so on. And it's only at the top of that pyramid that you get into self-actualization, or what we need at work is optimized work effort. So you've got all these rungs on the ladder that people need to have fulfilled before they are ready to do the work. And some old school leaders, and I'm certainly qualified to talk about old school leaders, look at it and say, BS on that. I'm paying them to do a job, get to work. And it sounds like you had that in the construction world, and I certainly can relate to that. Spent my time out there too. And so there's that school of thought about, I don't need to worry with all that. That's their problem. They need to go fix it. But I think the reality is more and more leaders who are running bigger companies are realizing the demand. The workforce is telling them, I need my leader to be a little more understanding of where I'm coming from and what I'm doing. And if you're not willing to do that, Mr. Leader, I'll go find a job with somebody that does. And, people are voting with their feet out there.
100%. I think, if we look at maybe even, I'll even just go back, 25 years when I joined the workforce, we didn't have the internet. There was, half of, or maybe even 3/4 of the jobs that exist today didn't exist 25 years ago. So, right. When a lot of our senior leaders that are running organizations today were in the workforce, there wasn't a ton of choice. And I think we learned to tolerate a lot of behavior that we no longer have to today because of the amount of choice that's in the marketplace. And over and over again, I hear and read and see in the news that labor is our, the number one commodity that we're short on, right? We can't find enough people to staff job sites, to run services, to build our businesses the way that we need to. And yet we're still leaning on these kind of practices from a time where choice didn't exist, right? And if I didn't like you as a leader, like, it might take me way longer to find a new role than it does today. So I think that's really part of this conversation, is people have a lot more choice. They're showing us that they're exercising that right where their needs are not being met. And I love that you talk about the human needs, because we all are human beings. Like, that is what, there's the widgets we produce and the services we produce, but all of that happens because of the human beings behind the scenes. And we do have needs.
Yeah.
And if we don't take time as leaders to understand that and meet those needs, those human beings go elsewhere and get those needs met.
I agree. And real quick, going back to the Maslow's hierarchy idea, if you don't believe that's true, just think about the moment when you've looked at one of your employees and you've said, George doesn't seem like himself today, or Sally doesn't seem right today. Well, guess what? they might have had a big fight with the spouse going out the door. 100%. So their mind is 100 miles away. And no, they're not right. They're not their usual selves. That they've had a situation that has kind of knocked them down on that hierarchy some way, or maybe they've got a sick kid, or a sick parent they're worried about. There's things going on in life that are distracting. And again, the old school guys are going to say, forget that. When you're here, you need your mind. I need your hand and your head, and I've heard people say their rebuttal is, well, you might have my body, but you don't have my mind, and of course, the mind is where our best work originates. So if you can't, and
Yeah.
I don't want a guy out on a scaffold if he's not thinking straight about what he's
Right.
doing. I
Yeah.
mean, that's a whale of a scary proposition. So,
Absolutely. When I was in my kind of younger years of my career, I often used to think like, I had to kind of park my personal self at the door in a suitcase or whatever, and then go to work and then park my work self outside my house door because I wasn't allowed to bring work home either, and let that interfere with life. And I think it works both ways, right? Our families uh, need to practice empathy for those of us out in the workforce because we're going through this day, right? Things are happening to us at work, project deadlines, decisions being made, things happening inside organizations with team members. All of those things need to be understood and allowed for, just like at work. We come as a whole human being, and all of those things that are happening in our personal lives don't get parked at the door anymore. So, we get to carry around ourselves in all of our different roles all day long.
right, right.
Yeah.
So, Erin, when you are asked to come into an organization and maybe help the leadership team understanding this, where do you start?
It's a great question. What I have found to be, I guess, most impactful is really starting with this practice or this notion of empathy for self. So you might refer to it as self-compassion. You might, but what I find is for those of us, and I do put myself in this category, who are identify as high achievers, who set big goals, who are highly ambitious, who want to grow big companies and do big things, we can really forget this practice of letting ourselves off the hook and having a little bit of compassion for our own shortcomings and our own mistakes and our own failures, so to speak, right? We can be very quick to kind of push them aside, to not give them their due, to not feel through them, and to beat ourselves up about them. And what I have found is that in doing that, that's exactly how we show up for our team members. Right. So if we cannot create understanding for ourselves as being human beings and allowances for ourselves as leaders to be human beings, to have an off day, to, maybe not show up in the way that we want to show up because of something going on in our personal lives, if we can't find the capacity to allow ourselves to be human, we're never going to find the capacity to allow our teams to be human.
I asked you when we were kind of prepping in the green room, one element of this that I think about when we're talking about a skill or ability to be an empathetic leader, there's always the realm and the spectrum of personality that shows up, and I think maybe impacts the ability to be empathetic or not. And whichever personality spectrum you want to talk about, whether it's DISC, Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, Hogan, blah, 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 there are a lot of them that try to inform us and help us understand personality differences. There's undeniably certain personalities that are more prone to be able to be empathetic versus those that are kind of shunning it or can't connect with it. But, any thoughts on how to help those people that fall somewhere in the personality spectrum that may not be as sensitive to this?
Yeah. And I like that you use the word spectrum because the way that I have seen this manifest in my work is it is a spectrum. On one end, we will have maybe what we would call the more sensitive or the highly sensitive folks, which we tend to identify as the empathic people. And then on the other end, we have those that kind of go, ooh, emotion, I don't really like that. Let's stay away from that. Let's stay in logic and reasoning and, just kind of
analytics and all that.
Let's not deal with emotion. That seems kind of fussy and unpredictable. What I see in these groups of people on the far ends of either of this spectrum is neither has the capacity to sit with their own emotions or those of others. The highly sensitive are so finely tuned to this that it can really throw their, like, they get so wrapped up in it, right? And that's where we kind of see this burnout and drama and all of these not necessarily productive responses to emotion, let's say. And so both groups really have to work to come to the middle. And that's where this work starts, is like, how good am I at holding my own emotional state, knowing when I need a break, when I need a rest, when I can push. What are my emotions telling me about the decisions that I'm making? Am I feeling angry but not allowing myself to express that? Am I feeling frustrated but not allowing myself to express that? Am I holding back from a tough conversation? How good am I at that for myself? And then how good am I at that within the practice with other people, right? So I have seen both ends of this spectrum needing to build the skills to come to the middle. And empathy is a skill that we can build. It is a muscle, just like our bicep or our quads. Like if we do the reps and we do the workouts and we put the practice in, that muscle gets stronger and we build more capacity to sit in curiosity with both ourselves and other people.
I like that. And I would agree with you. I think in terms of leadership attributes that people ought to aspire to include in their leadership toolkit, this notion, well, let me say first, all of the things you might put on your list of attributes for leadership that define the leader you want to be, they all can use work. They all can be strengthened, as you said, using the muscle analogy. They all can be perfected with practice and repetition and coaching and advisory help to kind of shape and inform what you're doing. Just like a golf swing or a tennis swing, you can work on those things and make it better. And this capacity to be empathetic is one of those things. So I totally agree with that. I think that's an interesting addition to the concept. The other thing,
tool. I was going to say, Doug, it's a tool, right? It's a tool in our leadership toolbox, right? So if you use the analogy of golf, you don't go out there. I mean, okay, I go out on the course and use 2 clubs because I'm not a great golfer. My husband, who puts a lot of time in on the golf course, knows exactly how far each club in the bag goes, knows how to adjust it. He's got way more clubs than I do because he's got a whole lot more tools in his bag, right? And empathy is just one of our tools in the leadership toolkit. One of the biggest things that I get is like, when people hear this term of empathetic leadership, they're like, oh my God, I'm just going to be sitting around and having these like emotional conversations all day long and nobody's going to get anything done. And it's like, no, that's not it at all. It's like, there is a time and a place to take a beat and to pull out this tool and to try to understand what's happening in the team and to allow space for, I'm having that off day. I did just have a big fight. My kid got a diagnosis. The client unloaded on me yesterday and I don't know what to do, and I'm trying to solve this problem on my own. And I have this fear of, making a mistake, because how many of us do? Allowing for that conversation to happen and then chart your course forward as a leader, right? Then you go and set the goals and get things done and push and coach and provide feedback and all those other tools that we have in our toolbox as leaders. But I feel like what the workforce is demanding is more of that initial, let's seek to understand first. Let's get curious about what's happening, which hasn't always been the skill we've relied on as leaders to get things done.
Yeah. Well, and your phrase there, of course, is on Stephen Covey's list of 7 habits, seek first to understand, then be understood. And it's such a powerful idea. And it can start with that idea. I go back to that analogy, George and Sally don't seem like themselves today. Mm-hmm. What's going on? Is there anything we can help with? Is there anything we need to know about? And in the bigger scheme of things, the idea that you may have to ask a coworker to fill in so you can release them to go take care of this issue they've got is a very temporary moment. Now,
it is, and it builds a ton of loyalty and engagement when you
right,
allow people to be human, right? When
right,
you say, if you need the afternoon to go deal with that thing, to use your analogy of George and Sally, it's like, yes, we've noticed you're off. Okay, that's what's going on. How much time do you need? Well, I might need 2 hours. Great. Go deal with the thing. When they come back, they are like 110% more invested in you, in the team, in the goals, because it's that it's that reciprocation that gets activated, right? Is like, you've done
yeah,
something for me, so I am now naturally want to show you that I appreciate that. I
right,
want to give back. And I don't think that that's a tool we've had to rely on in the past to get the job done, because there wasn't choice, because people didn't have a lot of options as to where to go. And now they do. I can build a career online with my laptop from my bed if I want to, right? I don't need to go to an organization like I used to have to do.
right,
Um, and so I
right.
think that's a really important thing for leaders to understand is, we're not saying, like, I'm definitely not saying empathy is the only tool you need to put in your toolbox. I think it's an addition.
I like that. And I do agree with you. I think there's been a little bit of an evolution of that need and that desire um and the big issue is I think it starts with the leader being the model for that outward receptivity and that maybe call it giving of that opportunity. Again, beating up on my old school boomer buddies, there's a thinking like, I'm not going to trust them until they trust me, and that's like, no, you've got it totally upside down.
Yeah.
You need to be the one showing trust so that they feel trusted, then they will start trusting you, and it will work much better. I've told the story in my banking days. I had a large team of administrator type people that worked for me, and at the time in that evolution of things, the bank had a standard for keeping time cards, and I said, we're not going to do time cards in my department. And they said, you have to do time cards or people aren't going to get paid. And I said, oh, yeah, they're going to get paid, but I'm not doing time cards. And they said, well, how do you know they do the work? I said, oh, I'll know. I'll manage that.
Obvious.
That's what you hired me to do. I'll tell you if they're doing the work or not. And I went around and around on that, and my people got paid on a very regular basis. I mean, we submitted the paperwork to get them paid, but it wasn't supported by time cards. And our HR regulators, they were having cardiac. Well, we don't have the documentation, we don't have blah blah blah. And I'm like, for what my people need to do, it's not about punching the clock. It's about doing the work. And we were directly supporting loan officers throughout the whole bank system. And so, the measure was, are the transactions getting done? And that's whether or not we're hitting the mark. And, the benefit it had, and this again, I believed it could be true. The benefit was if somebody needed to stay 30 extra minutes to finish a transaction rather than punch out and go home, they did, because they knew there was some fluidity. And by staying 30 late today, they could come in 30 late tomorrow. And as long as they were getting their work done, I didn't care.
Yeah.
And I made that
and that
clear
really,
to them.
And I think what you're speaking there to, Doug, is this need that we all have for a little bit of autonomy, right? The ability to, I am more motivated. And this is, again, we're talking a lot about psychological needs of the human being, but my motivation increases when I know I have control over my world, right? And managing that however I need to manage it. I had a leader very early on in my career, was fortunate enough to have a leader, and what would always come back on the the corporate engagement surveys was this need for work-life balance. And the very first time I was a part of his team and this survey was done and he was debriefing the results with us, he's like, you guys, I have told you this before and I will tell you it again. I am not telling you to pick up that phone at 9 p.m. or to check your email at 6 a.m. Work-life balance is yours to manage, right? And I was very young in my career, and that was a very pivotal moment because I could see the habits I was starting to build as a bit of a high achiever, somebody who wanted to make a difference and, grow in her career. I was starting to build bad habits around my own boundaries between work and life, right? And he 100% was correct. He was not saying you had to do this. This was an organization back in the early 2000s where we were already working from home. It was completely remote. There was nobody clocking me in or out, watching me sit at my desk all day long. But to your point, they knew if I was doing my job or not, right?
Yeah.
The numbers couldn't lie. Like it was very clear if I was calling customers, making sales, doing the things that I needed to be doing. And so I really think that that's the thing that we're unlocking inside of our teams when we take time to understand, when we practice a little bit of empathy with our teams, is we're giving them that gift of autonomy, that gift of understanding, so that they feel motivated to engage with us.
I think that's a great point that I'd like to emphasize, and that is the notion as leaders, we need to find our own groove, our own rhythm of how we need to optimize what we do. But if we make choices and set boundaries that are contrary or potentially radically different from everybody else around us, we need to communicate the expectation. And to your point, what came to my mind, I had a leader I worked for once who had a habit of sending out emails at like 4 a.m. It was just her thing, the way her sleep pattern and how she was wired. But she would tell us, she said, look, don't react to that. Don't look at the timestamp and react to that. I will tell you if I have an urgent request. Otherwise, it just goes into the flow. Look at it when you get to it, deal with it accordingly. I will promise you, I'll tell you if something is urgent or priority, but otherwise it's a normal flow event. Don't read anything into my timestamp. And
100%.
we got used to that.
Yeah. And it's so important because if she was just sending out emails at 4 a.m. without that piece of communication, you're like, pretty soon the story you tell yourself is, well, I better be up at 4 a.m. working away. And pretty soon then it becomes this expectation of like, well, my boss needs me to be there at 4 a.m. And now I have no work-life balance, when that was never the intent, right? Right. Never the intent behind that. And I 100% agree with you that I think sometimes as we get into our leadership positions, there's this, we have earned trust in the organization. We have demonstrated we can deliver. And so there is a lot more flexibility given to us as mid and senior level leaders that is not available to maybe our frontline employees and our frontline leaders. And we need to really be clear about that as well, because it's also setting an expectation or, if we tell our teams, like, you have to be in your desk from 8 to 4:30, but as leaders, we roll in at 9 and leave at 3 to pick up our kids. It's like, well, why is that rule different for you than for me? You're allowed to manage your life as you see fit and take telephone calls from the pickup line, at the elementary school, but I have to be behind this desk and hire somebody to go do that. Right there, that creates a big imbalance. And again, we're not fully understanding what our team members are up against just to get to a place of work in the morning, or to be fulfilled and really ready to work. So what I have found is that usually it is very tiny adjustments that make huge impacts on people's lives and really allow them to feel autonomous, to feel like they are in control of their world again, and to really feel understood. It's tiny little conversations and tiny little adjustments in our behavior.
I totally agree. But I do think it begs the question from the leader's standpoint, can you look look in the mirror and ask yourself the tough question. Am I doing what I need to be doing to optimize this situation?
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes that, I think the part of the reason empathy is hard to practice in general, for whether you feel a lot of emotion or you don't feel a lot of emotion or identify as one of those two people, is it brings up our own stuff, right? When we see somebody else struggling with balancing kids and work, or having an aging parent, or a kid with or managing their own personal diagnosis, it brings up our own fears, our own vulnerabilities. And that's why I say a lot of this work really does start with what's your capacity to really be honest with yourself. Like you said, how are you doing as a leader with what you're carrying? Because you can't expect to sit with someone else in their heavy moments if you can't see your own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Boy, that I just did a fast forward there. That opens up so many other things that we're probably not going to have time to get into, unfortunately. But
always does. Yeah.
Well, Erin, I do think we are about up on time, but thank you so much for sitting in. Tell people the best way to get a hold of you if they're interested in learning more.
Yeah, that would be great. So I also have a podcast called Tactical Empathy. I believe we're going to link to that in the show notes. So they're short little episodes, again, with some key takeaways. But also I welcome anybody who's curious about this work to just shoot me an email, Erin@erinthorpe.ca.
Very good. Well, you are right. We will have all that information in the show notes, folks, as we always do. And one last time, Erin, thanks so much for sitting in. This is great.
Yeah, thanks for the conversation today, Dad. I really appreciate it.
Well, folks, this is the part of the show. I like to remind you, we do have a video version of this over on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. If you're listening on your favorite streaming service, don't forget to hop over to YouTube when you get a chance. Check out the video archives and see what we've got going on over there. I think that's it for now. If you've got a comment or recommendation, or maybe you yourself would like to be a guest, reach out to me on my website, DougThorpe.com, and hit one of the contact buttons there and leave me that message. Let me know what you're thinking, and would love to be in touch with you. But with that, we're going to sign off, say goodbye. Go out there and make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit DougThorpe.com.